All right, you got a lot this session. You all had an agenda at one point in time, then the Supreme Court changed that agenda.
Yep, they changed their bit of it.
Absolutely. But before we get in and start talking about pensions, which will probably loom over you all and take up much of the time and much of the media coverage, I did want to talk about a couple things. There were you all passed a lot of stuff this past spring, but there were some things that I think everybody would agree there were some unintended consequences that came out of them. Are there some corrections that people are upset or worried about that you know are going to be addressed this session?
Yeah, there's a couple, and actually there's probably more than what I'm going to mention, but I know that these bills have been filed. One of them was with our tax reform bill. The way the revenue cabinet interpreted it, they were nonprofit organizations involved with like charitable gaming type stuff. They were being assessed the sales tax and stuff on their services. There is a bill to correct that. It's being filed by Speaker of the House David Osborne, and that I know that that's going to be addressed, and because that was an unintended consequence, and it's based on the interpretation. And of course, whenever anything's open for interpretation, we can argue until we're blue in the face. It'll end up being in court, and you hope a judge agrees with you. The easiest way to fix it is just pass legislation, and pass the legislation that specifically says how you want it. And so that's what the attempt's going to be made, not with that one, but with other ones. One of the other things, and the House actually addressed this last year. We knew when we passed, because of the actuarial analysis and the stuff that was required to pass the revenue bill, we did not have enough time to add an amendment and have the reports done to pass it. So we passed our revenue bill, which reduced the retiree compensation tax credit from $41,000 down to $31,000. We knew that was an issue, so at the same time that we passed the revenue bill reducing that down, the House of Representatives also passed a bill that restored that credit from 31 back up to 41,000. It passed the House overwhelmingly. The Senate did not pick it up, so therefore it died in committee over in the Senate. That bill's been refiled and will be open or be up for vote again this session. There's already bipartisan support in the House to support that, and I feel like there's support in the Senate as well to pass it. But that bill will be moving forward to correct that and raise the tax exemption from 31 back up to 41,000 for our retirees.
Since those two are like you said, bipartisan support, and almost overwhelmingly are things that most people want done, do you think there's any chance that gets done in those first 4 days?
I really don't see. I don't see any bills getting passed the first 4 days.
Okay.
And one of the reasons is because we were hoping to come into a session that the pension was behind us. And you make some corrections to some of the unintended consequences that happened when some of the legislation passed, but you move forward. Well, with the Supreme Court's ruling on December the 13th, that's changed the whole thing. So I'm not so sure we're going to be in a position where we can have committee meetings and stuff quick enough to and have bills presented to where we can pass something the first. And I might be totally wrong. That's my guess or my assumption, because the pension will be the major issue again. And for the most part, we're starting from square one. Everything's back on the table. Anything can happen. Anything can be cut.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. Is the Supreme Court, and correct me if I'm wrong, ruled that the process was unconstitutional on how you all passed it, but they really made no comment on the meat of the bill itself and how it stood. Is that correct?
And that's absolutely correct. And neither the lower court nor the Supreme Court ruled on anything pertaining to content. And now this is just my personal opinion. This is not an official opinion in any way, but I feel like the Supreme Court or the court in general overstepped their bounds. There's a clear distinction between the separation of government, between the executive, the legislative, and the judicial branches. There's a Separation of Powers Act that defines all that. And it's clear in our Constitution that pertaining to legislation, the legislative body decides on the process or the rules that they operate on.
But who in a checks and balance system, who would be the check to make sure that the legislation's following the rules they establish?
The check would come in when it's taken to the Supreme Court. The check comes, in my opinion, the check, and I'm not an attorney, so you know, a legal genius might argue me till that, but to me the check comes in when you're going to address the constitutionality of the office, or when you're going to question whether it requires 49 versus 51 votes, because at that point they're looking at our rules, and if our rules say 51 and we pass it with 49, then you know they're making a decision based on the rules that they've been presented that we're supposed to be. So I think that's in their purview to decide that. It's definitely in their pure purview to decide whether or not a piece of legislation is constitutional. The lower court nor the Supreme Court, they refused to address any of them issues. They did not rule on any of that. All they did was rule under the process, but when it was a 44-page ruling, and the process, in their ruling, they stated that their objection to our process was not the fact that we were having our readings of the bill by title only.
Mm-hmm.
They said that's perfectly fine. They upheld all of our process where they had their issue, or where they had their issue was the fact that when we have a reading by title only, the title should match the content of the bill. Okay. I understand that logic. I agree with that logic. But what I don't agree with is they ruled on our process because which I don't think they were allowed to do.
Gotcha.
And because there is, I mean, we decide we as the legislative body decide what we vote on the rules.
Okay.
I mean, we decide and we pass them, and so the legislative body had not only determined that was a legitimate it's been done for 54 years.
Yeah.
It's there, and it's not only been done in Kentucky. It's done in numerous states throughout our country.
And just to be clear, that some of the other bills that were passed the exact same process, there have been no challenges to
Never
those
been
bills.
a challenge to any of them.
Or even the ones that you all passed.
Correct.
Okay.
So that's where my disconnect with them is. I think they overstepped their bounds because they ruled on the process. They should have ruled on the stuff that's in their purview. But me as a legislator and a member of the legislative body, we're not going to get anywhere arguing this with the Supreme Court. So although I think they overstepped their boundaries, I don't think their logic is flawed. Mm-hmm. I agree with their logic. If we're going to have a reading of a bill by title and title only like we do, and then they said we can continue to do that, but the title has to match the content.
So out of the 3 readings, only 2 of them was the new title, and the first one was actually whatever the bill was originally named, and then when you all changed it from the wastewater bill to
when we put the committee sub on it, we changed it.
But you only had 2 readings on that.
Yeah.
And that's where they said, okay.
Now, they also said that where we can do away with the second and third reading by majority vote of the House, which is basically what we did.
Mm-hmm.
And they upheld that part. But where their sticking point was when we added our committee sub, which gutted the sewer bill and changed it to the content to pitching. Mm-hmm. We still kept it. We should have done a title amendment and changed the title.
Okay.
Which would have required it would have took a little bit longer to do that, and we didn't have the time. That's why it wasn't done.
Gotcha.
But the practice or the process that we followed was the same exact process that they've been using in the state for 52, 54 years.
All right. So you mentioned, the bill was passed. Obviously, there's been a ton of media time, internet time, social media time spent on what was actually in the bill and those kind of things. Are there things that were in the bill back in the spring that you look at now and say, it's probably not going to be included, that's going to be changed? Do you expect any changes in what the meat was?
Well, when we came in for the special session, we were under the legislators. We were under the assumption, and let me qualify this. When I say legislators, the ones of us that are members of the majority caucus, we met and we talked and we were all under the assumption that the bill would be Senate Bill 151, just as we passed it the last time. Just the title would match the
Gotcha.
content, like the Supreme Court had said.
And that's when you came back for the special session.
That's when we came back to the special session. What actually happened with the special session, and once again, I understand the logic, we just didn't have enough time to do it. When the bill was drafted, the attorneys that was drafting it, we've already been informed by KEA and FOP and various organizations that regardless of what we pass, they're going to sue over the pension bill again because the other issues weren't. They want answers to the other issues.
Gotcha.
So.
And they didn't get those from the original
none of us
ruling.
got them. And,
Yeah.
and I'm not even criticizing. I understand that they want answers, and it would. That's one of the reasons the governor asked the courts to rule on that, and of course they chose not to. But the bill, when they brought the draft into us, they had some of the issues that was raised in the original lawsuit from the Attorney General that wasn't ruled upon. They changed some of the language in the bill, which their intent was, if we pass this, then we could stave off another legal challenge.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when they changed it, we wasn't going to have enough time to get it through bill review and the different steps that we take to make sure that we not only understand it, but it's statutory and everything before we pass it.
So the 4.5 days, I don't even know if you would call it a half a day since you started at 8 p.m.
In a nutshell,
on Monday. You just didn't have enough time in there.
In a nutshell, the way this was going to work out, there were certain things that we had to get done before we could put the bill through committee and vote on it. With the changes that were made to the bill and the questions that had arisen, we wasn't going to have enough time to get it all done and completed by Saturday. Now, the complicating factor was we're not allowed to meet on Sunday, but we wasn't going to be able to meet on Monday or Tuesday because of Christmas Eve and Christmas. So we would have had to recess on Saturday, and we would have been off for 3 days before we could come back. Well, we're going to that's money that's being spent, because while we're in session, whether recess or not, people are getting paid, are getting paid to do certain jobs. So that was going to cost the state a lot of money, because we would have had to extend the session by a minimum of 3 days. So we, as a caucus and as the Republican majority, not only in the House but in the Senate, we all agreed that the best way to save taxpayers' money, let the different processes take place on the bill that we had begun drafting, and let's go ahead and adjourn and come back in January, or come back into our normal session and then address it, and that way we could stop the meter from running and save money.
So the governor called a special session at 8 p.m. on Monday. What time was it Tuesday that the House adjourned the special session? Approximately.
It was between 10 and 11 o'clock that evening.
That evening? Okay.
Yeah.
So you all were here 26, 27 hours, something along those lines?
More or less.
Okay. All right. Now, the bill that was filed on Monday night, there's been comments made back and forth. Has that become public? Have you seen what's in the bill? I mean, how does that...
It's become public, but the things in the bill there was questions about it, and there's a big contingency of people just like myself. I want to pass Senate Bill 151 again, and the reason I want to is because although the opposition during my election said to the contrary, it was a misrepresentation of what actually happened, but I read Senate Bill 151 before it was voted on. Even though it was voted on that fast, I read it, I understood it, I understood what was going to happen. The actuarial analysis that was required, we had been able to, that it was the same actuarial analysis that would have applied to Senate Bill 1 when we were putting it together with the changes that we had made. So we didn't have an actuarial analysis that said that was exact, but we took the actuarial analysis from Senate Bill 1, and we said, all right, we're going to make these changes to Senate Bill 1, which is what Senate Bill 151 was. How's that going to change? And we got the results. So it wasn't a newly done analysis, but we had the answers to where we knew how it was going to affect.
Okay.
And so we voted for it. And then I spent all summer long talking to people and convincing them, this is what I did. This is why I think you need to reelect me. Then when I was reelected, by the numbers that I was, that told me that one, the people trusted me, or my constituents trusted me, and they believed in what I did. So I'm not willing to change that at this point. Now.
So you felt like you ran on your record of this is what I did, and you were voted in based upon your record.
Yep, and I'm not willing to change that, but I am a realist. I realize that because of the downgrading, some of the unforeseen consequences of the Senate ruling, like the downgrading of our credit rating now and the amount of money that's going to cost the state, there might have to be changes moving forward. And of course, once again, we'll see what they are. We'll see what the proposals are, and then the process starts just like day one did with the pension last time.
Little side note here. I know I talked to Mayor Stinson, and he was talking about every time the Fed comes out and raises the interest rates, of which the president has complained about, that's costing the city of Falmouth money in this water project that they're doing. As you were talking there about the credit downsizing, and I don't know the answer to this question, but it got me thinking, does that affect their ability to get a loan for the water and the sewage project that they're wanting to do, or maybe the interest rate? Is there any downfall to them?
I'm not a financial whiz,
okay,
but the way it was explained to me with the downside or the downgrading of our credit rating, just like anybody that has a credit card, the lower your credit score, the higher your interest rate. The lower our, this is basically the state, this is the state's credit score.
Yeah.
So the lower we have, the higher our interest rate. Well, all the money that's bonded by state government and our local and county governments that bond money through the state, the interest rates are now going up.
So you being a former mayor,
so it will inadvertently cost them money, possibly. Okay. I don't know. You got to look at the contracts and you got to look at the specifics, but just in a generalized comment, yes, it could cost them money because if they got a flexible rate, it's going to go up.
Well, and a lot of people hear this,
variable rate, I guess is.
They see a national story about the Fed rates going up. They hear the governor talk about the downgrading credit, and it doesn't hit home. They don't want. But here's a situation for Pendleton County that those two stories may have a negative effect.
Depending on how their bond, or they borrowed their money.
Yeah.
Now, if they borrowed the money from a bank, but most governments borrow it through, like the Kentucky Infrastructure Authority, government agency. They borrowed some. It's all kind of like a train or a chain. It's all attached.
Yeah.
And the sad part about it is when when you're looking at it on a state level, we're borrowing money and bonding money. We're not doing hundreds of thousands of dollars. We're doing millions and billions of dollars. So 0.5% can cost us millions of dollars.
Yeah.
So it don't take a lot for that to add up. But when it starts costing the state money, we have to pull that money out of the general fund. And so that's going to cut the amount of road projects, sewer projects, water projects, the money that we can pay to school districts. A lot of the money that we're paying out, that will affect.
Well, and of course the teacher's response to that has been the money that not your General Assembly, but the previous General Assemblies, when they weren't paying in the money to fund the pensions correctly, they were using that money to pay for the road projects and those other projects, so that those things were covered, and the pensions were the ones that were shortened 10, 15 years ago by those General Assemblies.
No, I would agree with that, but the issue there is the money was spent.
Yeah.
The money's not there.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, they're upset, and I'm not even. My wife's a teacher. My sister-in-law's a teachers. I understand the dilemma or the perception or the feelings. You know,
Mm-hmm.
you stole from me, but if
Well, you did. The previous General
If
Assemblies.
somebody robs you, and I'm going to try to come in and help you save your house or pay your mortgage, I can only do so much because I only have so much to work with. We created the mantra last session, and it's already started this session now too. Find funding, fund the pension. Well, we funded the pension. Our budget, which is the only budget that the Republicans have put together and passed, and I will note, we passed our budget without any Democratic support. So it wasn't bipartisan. It was the Republicans. So blame us for it for what you want, but it was passed. But it was the first budget in 95 years that the Republicans did. It's the only budget that's been done in 95 years that the Republicans have done, and we funded the pension, not only the ARC, but we put around $2 billion in it to account for what was being taken away from you years past. So when they say fund the pensions, we funded the pensions.
So what you're saying is, not only did you fund the pensions the way it was supposed to be for this 2-year biennium, but you put $2 billion, did you say?
I don't remember the exact
whatever
numbers,
but to make up for what wasn't funded in the past.
We funded the ARC, plus we put in X amount of dollars to help to start paying down the unfunded liability.
Okay.
And our pension bill created the process to where that unfunded liability, kind of like a mortgage, would be paid down in, I don't know, I don't remember the years, 20, 25 years, whatever it was. But the other thing that the process, or that our bill did, we made minimal changes to the structure, like with the capping of the sick days and stuff. But the reason why them changes were made is because the way the system's structured and the way people could enhance their retirements and do different things with their benefits, that was bleeding the system faster than the unfunded portion part, because people are retiring younger, they're living longer, and I mean the money wasn't being put in there, so the investments weren't being made, and they wasn't getting a return on the investment to keep it going.
And I chuckle because I'm one of those people. You know, I retired at the age of 51, and I've been very honest and say, if I lived to the same age of my dad, who's 83 and still kicking, and then I will have been in the retirement system longer than I was actually a teacher. And that doesn't seem to me logistically a system that is sustainable. I know one of my first things I did as retirement was to attend a Kentucky Retired Teachers System conference in Northern Kentucky, and he spoke about when the pension system first came in, there were 7 to 8 teachers for every active teacher, and now it's less than 1.
Yeah.
And there's just some things that's not working. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, and I'm kind of in a similar boat. I mean, you know, I retired with 22 and a half years of service. Actually, I worked 18 years for Lexington Fire Department, but with the other things I was involved in, I retired with 22 and a half years of service, and I retired at the age 48. Or almost, month or two shy of 49, but same concept. And if I live long enough, I'll be in the pension longer than I worked in the fire service.
But you could be twice as long.
Yeah.
At your, I mean, you live to be the age of 80. That'll be 32 years you're in the retirement.
Now,
And-
I've worked in the fire service for 30 years, but I've not been in the retirement that long.
Yeah.
So, but kind of a similar boat. But we were able to come up with a plan that made minimal changes that still give people the opportunity to retire young.
Well, let me ask you a question, because this is one of the concerns that a lot of teachers have. And, I've had conversations in the Kentucky Teachers in the Know, that's a Facebook page, a Facebook group, that we've talked about this, that I've expressed what I just expressed, that it's not sustainable. But there's a lot of legitimate concerns among teachers that the changes in the retirement system, that it's not going to be a defined benefit, is really going to have people who would consider going to teaching not going into teaching. Me and you and Senator Schroeder have had numerous conversations about my concerns about that, with my son studying to be a teacher. Now, you mentioned that you have family members. There was just an article that came out earlier this week that the people wanting to go into teaching is diminishing. What do you say to those concerns, that the system without a defined benefit is really going to discourage people from going into teaching rather than...
I guess my first comment would be, or my first question if I was talking to somebody, what's your alternative? Because defined benefit pensions, they're gone in the private sector. They don't exist anymore. And two, based on what my family members tell me, and I was a substitute when I was right out of college. I subbed for a while, so I've got a little bit. And I was studying to get my teaching certification too at one time. So I've got a little bit of, not the experience that you have, or the insight you have, but I have a little bit. But from my standpoint, and from sitting on the education committee, I've really learned a lot. We've got a lot of issues that we need to address that I think would change that around, other than the pensions. We need to pass legislation that, and I don't. These are going to be general comments, and they're going to be very simplistic, but they are issues that if we can figure out a way to address them, we can increase our recruitment ability for teachers. One of them, we need to let teachers be teachers. Most of our teachers, and it's not anybody's fault or by any intentional action, but our teachers in public schools today, they have to deal with societal issues, discipline issues. They have to worry about whether or not their kids have enough food to eat, or you were a teacher, you know exactly what I'm talking about. We have all kinds of issues like that, and when you go to school and you study and you want to teach biology, or you want to be a physical education teacher, you're excited about that subject. And the reality of the matter is, when you take that job as a teacher, you're anything but a teacher. You're more of a social worker, or a primary care person for a kid, or for multiple kids. And we as a society, we need to figure out how to fix some of this stuff. We need to foster discipline in general. And I'm not saying we need to go out and, a lot of people say, make the argument, well, if you bust their butt, they'll straighten up. That's what happened to me. Well, you don't need that type of discipline. You need to teach discipline where people, kind of like they did in the military, they teach you the discipline that we're talking about. You have the discipline to pay attention to detail. You have a discipline, as a parent, you have the discipline to pay attention to what's going on in your kid's life. Get involved. Be a part of that. Make sure that you're guiding them or leading them down the correct path. We have a lot of people out there, young and old, that, and for lack of better terms, that have no discipline on anything. They just kind of live day to day by the seat of their pants, and we've lost our work ethic. There's just so many issues like that, and we need to figure out in public education what we need to do, or how we need to give back the ability of the teacher to be a teacher.
Now, you mentioned about a lot of societal woes. A lot of people was afraid that the family resource funding was going to be cut. And I think in the governor's budget, maybe it did suffer. But in your all's budget, it didn't.
We increased it.
Yeah, you increased it. Do you all see that as an important aspect of schools?
As long as myself and a lot of, not only Republicans, but a lot of the people that are in the legislature now, as long as we remain here, I could see that being increased again. Because right now, the Family Resource Center is our front line front line defense on addressing these societal problems, because that's what the people that work in that do. They're not there to teach. They're there to help get kids food and clothing and meet their basic needs so that they can come to school and be productive and learn. And I can't say enough about our family resource centers because they're providing a service. One, our educators are so overwhelmed now they couldn't do it. I mean, I don't know a teacher out there that would not want to do that for their student or students, but they don't have the time or the ability. Well, they got the ability, but they don't have the time or they don't
energy.
have the energy. They're just we dump everything on our public education, and if we want to save public education in this country, we've got to figure out how to let teachers be teachers and put the resources in there that can help the kids and the families address their basic needs, so that the teachers and the educators in our public schools are. That's what they deal with 90% of the time. They don't get the opportunity to be teachers.
A couple more questions on education, and then we'll move on to a different subject. I actually was talking to a teacher yesterday about a project we're wanting to do, and we had mentioned about the possible use of computers, and the comment was made, well, I can't get into computer lab because it's always being used for testing, and practice testing. And so here was a student who wanted to do a project with their kids in the computer lab, but because of the testing that they have to practice and get ready for on the state level, they're not able to.
That's one of the number one things that needs to be addressed. The standardized testing, I don't see where it's helping us to educate our kids any better. Personally, I'd like to see all of it gone. But when I say that, the caveat to my comment is I'm not a professional educator. I don't know enough to. I want to, as a legislator and on the education committee, I want to provide my schools the resources they need to be better educators. That's the one complaint that I hear from all of them. We've got to stop. We're too worried about a score on a test and whether or not we're worried about this child learning something.
So are you saying that that's what the teachers in your district have told you?
Well, not
the
just my
concern
district, the teachers I've talked to in our state in general, you know, they don't like it any more than the parents and the students like it. I mean, we're basically teaching to test, and we're not educating kids. We need to educate kids for life. We need to make them competitive outside of their school district. We need to make them competitive outside their community, outside the state, outside this country. And to be able to be competitive on a global scale, teaching to a test will not accomplish that.
And those mindsets comes from this city, somebody in this city, that whether it's the legislature or governor or the Department of Education.
At some point, somebody thought that was a good way to quantify how we're teaching kids. But at some point, it might have had its usefulness, but I think we do so much of it now, it's such a detriment. It inhibits, just like the example you give, it inhibits a teacher from being able to be a teacher.
Yeah. All right, two other things have come up recently. There was a story that came out last week that the State Board of Education was going to ask the legislators to do some things, find funding for charter schools, make some changes in school councils as far as choosing principals and having an increased parent representative. Any discussions, any thoughts about? I know that was an issue last spring, that everybody thought that you all in the budget were going to fund charter schools. You ended up not funding charter schools. Where do you see that?
It really hasn't even been a discussion. I mean, at some point in the history of the state, you're probably going to see some type of funding for charter schools. Me personally, I don't think we need to throw any money at charter schools until I can fully fund and make our public schools work. But the problem with my statement and the problem with the reality of the situation, charter schools are public schools. We didn't pass a bill allowing private schools. We passed a public charter school bill.
So there's a lot of people that say that there's private companies that's going to come in and going to run a charter school. Are you saying that that's not?
A private company can come in and start, if they meet the guidelines and stuff, they can apply to start a charter school. They can fund a charter school. But charter schools, the SIG funding follows the kids. Mm-hmm. So they will get taxed. If they are a sanctioned charter school by the Department of Education, they will get tax money. So they are a public school. Mm-hmm. But the charter school, to be able to operate, they one got to have a minimum of 100 students,
Mhm.
and two, they've got to have a funding mechanism of how they're going to operate, because they're not going to be able to levy a local tax like our school districts do, but they will be able to get tax money through the SEEK formula. You know,
But the SEEK funding won't be enough for them to pay all the bills.
I don't think. I mean, you were an educator. Do you think that
don't
you
think
could
so.
run a school just on SEEK funding?
I
That's
don't
where.
think so.
That's why when
Not a good school.
yeah, exactly. That's why they're going to be dependent on private companies, individuals, people donating money to fund that charter school. I mean, and they have to come up with their funding mechanism. That's part of their
Mhm.
proposal or their application to become a charter school. And I'm not versed well enough in the financial aspects of running a school to tell you how that's going to happen, but just common sense that they're going to be able to take money from private companies and other groups to fund their charter school.
Gotcha. What about the school council? Having parents presently have 2 representative, teachers have 3, and then
The
there's the
site-based
principal,
councils?
site-based council. Yeah, so with the principal and the 3 teachers, there's 4 school personnel, 2 parents. The story was that the state board is going to ask you all to make it 3 parents and 3 teachers. Any thoughts on that?
One of the presentations in one of our interim committee meetings was to redo the site-based councils.
Mhm.
There's some people out there that would like to do away with the site-based councils. I'm not real sure what's going to happen with it. I personally think the site-based councils, I think they work. I mean, at least my experience in my county, and we're from the same county, correct me if I'm wrong, I've not seen where they've been a hindrance
Yeah.
to our system. Now, I don't know about these bigger systems and stuff, but, you know, I look at Pendleton County, we're your typical rural Kentucky county. We're like the majority of eastern Kentucky, western Kentucky counties. We're a rural county, and I think they work. I've never heard, on my perspective, until this committee meeting, I've never heard any complaints about them.
So I assume. Go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to add, and I do think it allows the parents and the public an opportunity to weigh in on who they hire for principal or wherever. But I think the argument being made by some of the superintendents, it diminishes their ability to actually run their school district.
Mhm.
I can kind of see that argument, but at the end of the day, the whole reason they started was to allow the parents and the teachers to have more of a say in their work environment, in their teaching environment. So,
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm sure you'll reach out and have conversations with your superintendents of Harrison, Scott, and Pendleton County. I know in sending out a questionnaire to a couple of the board members, as well as the Superintendent Joe Berkeley, he expressed that he's not ever had any problems with the school councils and the way they're set up.
I have not really had a conversation with Superintendent Berkeley, but I have briefly talked about this, and we were eating lunch, so it was an informal conversation. But I briefly talked about this with Superintendent Dawson in Harrison County. Much the same answer. I mean, I think he sees the argument that's being made, and I do too. I mean, you don't want to. You hire a superintendent to run a school district for a reason. You
Mhm.
know, you don't just let it run amok or let it run itself.
Yeah.
You have somebody directing it. So I understand the logic behind, but he said that he's not had a lot of problems with that as well. So
Okay.
it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. I do know that that's going to be supposed to be a topic of conversation in our education committee. So.
Okay. We'll come back to the bill that you've pre-filed on school systems here in a bit, but are there any other issues with school districts that you expect to be be
No,
these 30 days?
No, because a lot of it, once again, a lot of it's going to be centered around the pensions, and so that's going to, as far as what affects our teachers, our state workers, and our state employees, that's going to be the big issue. That's what's going to happen. I mean, we have a lot of discussions that take place, and there's a lot of legislators, Republican and Democrat, that agree like I do. we need to figure out ways, and we don't have the answers yet, and hopefully we'll figure them out or find them. But we need to figure out how to let our teachers be teachers again.
Okay. All right.